Did you know on this day, April 24th, in the year 1800, the Library of Congress was established? Now, librarians love libraries almost as much as we like celebrating birthdays. So let's have a party for the Library of Congress. Get out your favorite piece of cake. Yum, yum. And I'm going to share the story of how Mr. Thomas Jefferson helped the Library of Congress. We're going to hear Mr. Jefferson Builds a Library. And this book is written by Barb Rosenstock and illustrated by John O'Brien. And can you see, he's even built a building shaped out of books. Jefferson sure did love books. In fact, in 1815, he said, "I cannot live without books." Thomas Jefferson learned to read and then never stopped. He sat and he read. He walked and he read. And lying in bed, instead of sleeping, he read. Books, 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 stories and geographies, poems, prayers, and plays. Tom gobbled books the way a starving man eats. Before he turned 6, people said he'd read every book in his father's library. Do you have books at home? I have lots of books everywhere. At school, Tom learned to read Latin. Amo libros. That means I love books. He learned to read French. J'aime lire. That means I love to read. He learned his manners, tripping through the minuet and bowing to the ladies, blushing till his freckles disappeared. Tom rode, hiked, sang, and played the fiddle. But he loved reading best. And while at college, he read 15 hours a day. And can you guess what he started collecting? What could it have been? Jefferson started collecting books. Lots of books. Histories and contracts, medicine, music, and math. Tom bought books on when to plant, where to plant, and how to think. Books with paintings, some with maps. He bought books all the way from Williamsburg to Philadelphia. Tom married and he read. He built a house and he read. Tom made sure that his children read too. He would spend weeks organizing books, huge folios on the bottom shelves, palm-sized duodecimos on top, books with red, blue, green, or brown, covers stacked from floor to ceiling. Tom's library wasn't in an alphabetical order like the others. He grouped books by subject, first in 9 broad categories, later in 3 classifications, divided into 46 different topics. Tom spent hours deciding exactly where each book belonged. He'd made a good librarian, wouldn't he? Tom belonged in that library of his at Monticello. He never wanted to leave his wife Martha, his children, his farm, or even his books. But when the colonists wanted their freedom from England, the people of Virginia needed someone smart to represent them. And can you guess who they picked? Who could it have been? Who was smart? Who read a lot? Could it have been Mr. Jefferson? That's right, they picked Thomas Jefferson. And he still found time to read, y'all. At the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, Tom used all that he knew from all the books he'd read to write the Declaration of Independence. These words started a new country, the United States of America. Now, many famous folks knew Thomas Jefferson, that tall redhead standing off in the corner reading. Along with his family and schoolmates, Tom included books as his best friends. Books made him laugh. Books made him wonder. Sometimes they made him cry, as he did in the days he watched hopelessly while his wife grew weak with a new baby girl by her side. Tom sat by her bed, reading the lines they'd copied together from their favorite books as Martha lay dying. Oh, that's sad. Tom missed Martha. He spent months riding alone in the woods near Monticello. His friends thought work might ease Tom's sadness. His new country needed strong friends in Europe. By fighting for independence, the young United States made many enemies in England. Someone must ask the King of France for help with trades and loans. Would Mr. Jefferson consider moving to Paris? Tom packed his memories and he traveled across the ocean for the very first time. And yes, y'all, he took books. He sailed and he read. He bounced in fancy carriages and he read. He bowed to the king, he charmed the court, and he read. Can you guess what Tom saw in Paris? Let's see. He saw the cathedrals, the courts, the queen, and of course, Mr. Jefferson saw the library. That's a pretty big library, too. When he wasn't busy with the kings and courtiers, Tom shopped for new books from Paris, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, Madrid, and London in languages that he knew. English, Latin, Greek, Italian, French, Spanish, Anglo-Saxon, and even languages that he wished to know, like German, Dutch, Bengali, Arabic, and Welsh. Booksellers loved to see Thomas Jefferson. He bought books from those he liked and even from the ones he didn't. He bought books in shops or street markets. He bought books for pounds or pennies. A few cost more than a working man made in a lifetime. Tom bought 2,000 books in 5 years. That's more than a book a day. I don't think anyone goes out to Walmart and buys a book a day, do they? 10 years after he came home, the people elected Thomas Jefferson the 3rd President of the United States. At that time, the U.S. Congress owned a small reference library of books on law and government. President Jefferson supported this Library of Congress. He appointed the first librarian and he suggested books to buy. While president, Tom doubled the size of the country, thanks to his friend Meriwether Lewis, and he more than tripled the number of books in its library. You know, I think I wouldn't mind Mr. Jefferson recommending a book or two for our library, especially if they're biographies on Meriwether Lewis. After 2 terms as president, Tom retired to Monticello, surrounded by family, friends, and books. He added to his house. He worked in his gardens. He raised his grandchildren, cuddling them and reading to their heart's content. And in his study, Tom used a revolving book stand to read 5 books at one time. His chair and work table revolved too, so he never needed to stop writing to read or to stop reading to write. You could say he had his own iPad of the time, 5 books at once. He wrote at least 19,000 letters, many about books. He told people what to read and when. Science before noon, history until supper. Stories from dark till bedtime. He listed books to read, and he sent boxes of books as presents. He lent books to James Madison. He sold books to James Monroe. And when no one else wanted to buy Ben Franklin's books, he bought those too. In 1814, England and the United States were at war again. British soldiers invaded Washington and set fire to the Capitol. Tom heard the terrible news. They'd burned the Library of Congress. 3,000 precious books gone forever. Boo, hiss, that's horrible. So, after 50 years of collecting, Tom owned more books than just about anyone else in America, and he couldn't let his country go without a library. So can you guess what Thomas Jefferson did? What did he do with all of those books? Well, first, he sorted and then he read. He labeled and he read. He wrapped and he read. And he sent all of his books to Washington, D.C. Tom's collection of over 6,500 books started a new Library of Congress, more than twice the size of the one lost in the fire. Besides government, politics, and law, Tom's books added a universe of curious subjects. Books on when to fight, where to fish, how to fly, microscopes and menus, games and ghosts, revolution, and remembering. Tom's collection never stopped growing. 200 years later, the Library of Congress owns more than 155 million items on over 800 miles of shelves in 470 languages. It adds around 11,500 new items each day. Movies and music, drawings, maps, newspapers, speeches, poems, lots of local history, national history, and of course, books, books, books. Over 35 million books, more than any library ever in history, including our little library. In fact, this very book here that I'm reading right now is in the Library of Congress. I think Thomas Jefferson would like that. I think he'd like that a lot. What do you think? The end. Now, wasn't that a fun story? Old Tom Jefferson, he sure did love libraries, and he sure did love books, and he loved his country. And when his library needed help, he knew exactly what to do. Would you like to be like Thomas Jefferson and help a library? I sure hope you'll say yes. Our little library here in Hohenwald, Tennessee is trying to expand our building so we can have room for more books and programs, and most importantly, so we have a proper storage space for our county archives. If you'd like to be like Jefferson and help a library, go to the link in this description. It will take you to our GoFundMe page where you can donate to help us with our library. I'd sure appreciate that. And you know what? I bet Mr. Jefferson would appreciate that too. So thank you so much for watching our little story time, and happy birthday, Library of Congress.